Lagos, Nigeria, April 1977. The night burns. Smoke coils above Kalakuta Republic like a dark fist closing over the city. Soldiers swarm the compound, hundreds of them screaming, kicking, firing into the air. The air smells of sweat, diesel, and gunpowder. Inside, the music has stopped. For the first time in years, silence fills the home of Africa's loudest rebel. They came for Fela Anikulapo Kuti, a man who didn't fight with guns, but with rhythm. With words sharp enough to cut through corruption, greed, and military pride. But tonight, the generals aren't listening to his songs, they've come to erase them. Boots crash against doors, women scream. Fela's wives, his dancers, his bandmates are dragged out, beaten. Vinyl records shatter under rifle butts. Instruments are smashed, microphones twisted from their cords. In the chaos, soldiers find Fela, shirtless, defiant. He doesn't run, he doesn't beg. He just stares, blood in his eyes, cigarette between his lips. The soldiers descend on him, boots, fists, metal rods. They beat him until he's barely breathing. Then they drag his broken body outside, through the dirt, and set the Kalakuta Republic ablaze. That night, the fire eats his studio, his home, and his mother's bones. But what it could never burn was his voice. Because this wasn't the end of Fela's rebellion, it was the night it became unstoppable. How did a saxophone player become the most feared man in Nigeria? How did music turn into a weapon powerful enough to shake a dictatorship? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning of the noise. The birth of a revolutionary sound. Fela Anikulapo Kuti was born in 1938 in the colonial city of Abeokuta, Nigeria, a place where power spoke with a British accent. His mother, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, wasn't just a mother, she was a lioness. A fearless activist who led protests against British taxes and patriarchal rule. His father, a clergyman and school principal, preached discipline and intellect. Between the two of them, Fela learned lessons that would shape his life, speak truth, and never kneel. He grew up in a house full of arguments, music, and politics. While other children learned hymns, Fela learned revolution. In 1958, he left for London to study medicine, his parents' wish. But instead of a stethoscope, he found a trumpet. Instead of lectures, he found jazz. He spent his nights in smoky bars, listening to Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, and Charlie Parker. He didn't understand all the notes, but he understood the freedom in them. That music didn't ask permission, it demanded to be heard. When he returned to Nigeria in the early 1960s, the country had changed. Independence had come, but not justice. The British were gone, but corruption had stayed, wearing new uniforms and new smiles. Fela started a band, Kula Lobitos, playing what he called high life jazz. It was polite, danceable, apolitical. The crowds liked it, the government didn't care. But something in him was restless. Then came 1969, Los Angeles. Fela's band went on tour, broke, hungry, and sleeping on couches. That's when he met the Black Panthers, young, militant African Americans who believed in power, identity, and resistance. They taught him words like oppression, systemic, revolution. They didn't play for applause, they played for liberation. Something inside Fela snapped and then awakened. He returned to Nigeria no longer a performer. He came back a prophet with a saxophone. He renamed his sound Afrobeat, a fusion of funk, jazz, and Yoruba rhythms, pulsing with hypnotic bass lines and political fire. His lyrics were raw, unfiltered, unforgiving. Songs like Zombie mocked the military, Zombie no go think unless you tell AM to think, Coffin for head of state accused generals of killing his mother. Shuffering and Schmiling mocked blind religion. Every performance became a sermon, every song, a weapon. Fela built his commune, the Kalakuta Republic, declaring it an independent state. A country within a country, governed by music, marijuana, and rebellion. People called him crazy, the government called him dangerous. The people, they called him king. He had over 27 wives, hundreds of followers, and millions of listeners. His stage became a battlefield where words replaced bullets. And in a nation ruled by soldiers with guns, that was unforgivable. By the mid-1970s, Nigeria was a powder keg. Oil money filled the pockets of generals while poverty rotted the streets. Fela's music named names. He exposed bribes, torture, and state lies. Every time his voice hit the airwaves, the regime felt its power crack. So they decided to silence him, and in 1977, they tried. But the question isn't how they broke him, it's how he refused to stay broken. The fire of Calcutta, the Calcutta Republic, wasn't just a home, it was a statement. A defiant middle finger to the Nigerian government built right in their face. It sat in the heart of Lagos, surrounded by chaos, poverty, and military patrols. Yet inside its walls, the air throbbed with drums, saxophones, and the scent of weed. There were murals of African heroes, children running barefoot, dancers rehearsing, lovers arguing, and a crowd that believed in one man's vision. Fela called it his spiritual nation, a place where people could live free, no police, no politicians, no pastors stealing from the poor. He'd say, "This is Africa without chains." But to the military regime, Calcutta was more than a commune, it was an infection. A breeding ground for rebellion, a voice too loud to ignore. By 1977, Fela had pushed every boundary. His new song, Zombie, was an open insult to the army, mocking soldiers as mindless tools who followed orders without thought. It blasted through radios and nightclubs, turning every dance floor into a protest. The generals were furious, they called him a national threat. And they wanted an example made of him. On February 18, 1977, the army struck. It began like a rumor, whispers of trucks on the outskirts of Lagos. Then came the sound, engines growling, boots stomping, commands shouted over loudspeakers. By noon, more than 1,000 soldiers surrounded Calcutta. The first shots rang out like thunder, the walls shook, people screamed. Fela ran toward the door, shouting for his band, his wives, anyone still inside. The soldiers burst through, tearing down everything in sight, records, instruments, speakers. His saxophone was crushed under a boot, women were dragged by their hair. One soldier grabbed his wife, Becky, and beat her unconscious. Fela tried to fight back, he was thrown to the ground, kicked until his ribs cracked. His mother, Funmilayo, 78 years old, was tossed from a second-story window. She would never recover. When it was over, the compound was gone, burned to the ground. Everything Fela built, his studio, his freedom, his dream, was now ash in the wind. They dragged him to Alabon Close, a police detention center known for breaking men. But Fela wasn't an ordinary man. He survived the beatings, the interrogations, the torture. And when they released him weeks later, battered, limping, but alive, he didn't disappear. He returned to the stage, and in front of thousands, he walked out with a small coffin in his hands. It wasn't a prop, it was real. On it, he had written, "Coffin for head of state." He marched straight to Dodon Barracks, the seat of the military government, and laid that coffin at the front gate. A personal delivery to the regime that killed his mother. That performance, half protest, half resurrection, was broadcast across the world. They had tried to bury him, but instead, they made him immortal. The Calcutta fire became legend. Fela's music spread further, louder, and angrier. He renamed his new club the Shrine, a spiritual home for the broken, the lost, the defiant. Every night, he performed like a man possessed. Each set could last for hours, filled with hypnotic rhythms and political venom. His audience wasn't just there to dance, they came to witness. And as his voice carried through the Lagos night, even the soldiers who burned his home couldn't silence the truth. He had turned his suffering into a revolution. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man alive. But Fela's war wasn't over. The military would come again. Arrest him again, beat him again, and still, he'd rise. Because now it wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom and the soul of a continent. The beat that wouldn't die. 1980s Nigeria, a country choking on oil money and military rule. The streets buzzed with corruption. Politicians drove Mercedes-Benzes past starving children. The soldiers ruled by decree. Fear was the national anthem. But somewhere in Achaia, behind flickering neon lights and clouds of marijuana smoke, the sound of rebellion still lived, the shrine. Inside, sweat dripped from the ceiling. Drummers pounded in trance-like rhythm. Horns cut through the haze. Dancers swayed like flames. And then like thunder he appeared, bare-chested, sax in hand, cigarette dangling from his lips. Fela Anikulapo Kuti stepped onto the stage. The crowd roared. He didn't need an introduction. His presence was the revolution, Fela leaned into the mic, eyes blazing. "My people suffer and smile. Suffer and smile." The crowd erupted. They weren't just listening to music, they were breathing resistance. Every lyric, every groove, every shout was a punch against oppression. For 4 hours, he performed like a man in battle. His band, Africa 70, moved as one living organism, guitar snarling, horns crying, percussion rolling like thunder. His songs were more than entertainment, they were evidence. He sang of police brutality, authority stealing, political hypocrisy, international thief, and the illusion of freedom, shuffering and smiling. In a country where newspapers were censored and journalists disappeared, Fela's microphone became the last free press, but the government never forgot. Between 1978 and 1984, Fela was arrested more than 200 times. They accused him of everything: smuggling, tax evasion, currency violations, anything they could twist into a charge. Once, soldiers broke into his home again, beat him nearly to death, and burned his instruments. Another time, they jailed him for illegal export of foreign currency, a setup so obvious it became a global scandal. Amnesty International called him a political prisoner. The New York Times called him the conscience of Africa. Still, he refused to stop. He turned every arrest into an album, every beating into a new lyric. His pain became performance art. And yet, for all his defiance, Fela wasn't unscathed. The weight of constant battle began to show. His commune became a revolving door of surveillance and paranoia. Band members fled, friends died, his marriages crumbled under chaos. But his faith in himself, in Africa, in freedom remained unbroken. He told his followers, "You can't kill the truth, you can only kill the messenger." By the mid-1980s, his fame had gone global. He played in Berlin, London, and New York. Western audiences came expecting rhythm and spectacle, but they got sermons instead. On stage, he'd pause mid-performance, point at the crowd, and shout, "They steal your oil, your diamonds, your future. And you dance for them." The crowd would fall silent. Then he'd laugh, blow his sax, and drag them back into the groove. Even from across the ocean, he refused to soften his message for Western comfort. He mocked colonial nostalgia, capitalist greed, and hypocrisy in both Africa and the West. To the oppressed, he was a prophet. To the powerful, he was a nightmare that wouldn't die. By the late 80s, Fela's health began to falter. He'd lost friends, wives, and much of his fortune. His voice grew hoarser, his body thinner. But his spirit, unyielding, he performed through fever, through pain, through loss. Even as AIDS quietly crept through his body, he never stopped playing. On August 2, 1997, the sax finally fell silent. Fela Kuti was gone. 1 million people flooded the streets of Lagos for his funeral. The military stayed away. The people didn't. They danced, cried, shouted, and sang his songs one last time. But death didn't kill him. Today, his words still echo in protests. His face still hangs on murals. His sons Femi and soon Kuti carry the flame, turning stages into battlefields. Every time Afrobeat plays, in Lagos, London, or New York, it's not just rhythm, it's rebellion. Because the man they tried to silence made his voice immortal. He didn't just fight the military, he fought fear itself, and he won. When the system burns your home, your music, your freedom, what's left to fight with? For Fela Anikulapo Kuti, the answer was simple: a microphone and the truth. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. Is Fela truly a legend? Thanks for watching.